The year is 865. The freezing air of Denmark carries the heavy weight of a royal bloodstorm. Ragnar Lothbrok is dead. The news brings no tears, but a brutal, burning desire for total war. Sigurd stares into the void. The knife slides in his hand, tearing skin until it touches bare bone. He feels no physical pain. The fierce hatred burning in his veins completely numbs any open wound. Bjorn grips a chess piece made of solid ivory until it violently explodes in his raw, open palm. Blood drips on the board. It is not grief. It is the start of a declaration of pure, violent death. King Aelle thought the snake pit would be Ragnar's end, but it was only the beginning of his own. The little piglets will grunt when they hear of the old boar. The prophecy now awakens pure evil. There will be no talk or agreements. Aelle has awakened a force of nature that cannot be stopped. The Great Heathen Army rises. The goal is not conquest. It is total and absolute annihilation. The mobilization that followed defied any known historical precedent in the north. Warriors from Sweden, Norway, and Ireland did not gather for the usual promise of silver or fertile land, but for the magnetic pull of legendary vengeance. Ancient tribal rivalries were suspended instantly. Mercenaries refused payment just to join the hunt. Ragnar's murder did not end an era. It unified the Viking world with a singular purpose: extermination. In late 865, sentries on the coast of East Anglia witnessed a horror that paralyzed their hearts. The horizon did not bring the usual 3 fast raiding ships, but a floating city composed of hundreds of dragon-headed drakars. It was not a raid. It was a migration of death. Blacksmiths, women, and supplies landed with the warriors. They did not come to steal and leave. They came to dismantle England brick by brick until nothing remained. Commanding this colossal force was not the brute strength of Bjorn Ironside or the stoicism of Sigurd, but the sharp mind of Ivar the Boneless. History debates whether his nickname came from a bone disease or inhuman flexibility, but his intellect was unquestionable. While his brothers were driven by emotional fury, Ivar operated with a cold mathematical cruelty. He understood that to destroy kings in stone fortresses, strategy was required. Ivar proved his genius by ignoring the obvious target. Instead of sailing directly north against Aelle, he landed in the east and began a psychological game. He terrorized the local population not to fight, but to provide supplies, demanding horses to transform his naval infantry into a devastating mobile cavalry. He spent the winter sharpening blades and letting fear travel north like a plague, knowing anticipation of pain breaks the spirit. When the snow melted in 866, the army was no longer a disorganized band, but a professional and hungry war machine. They marched north, crossing the country with a speed the Saxons considered impossible. The destination was York, the ancient Roman capital of the north. Luck favored the invaders, as Northumbria was paralyzed by a bloody civil war between the usurper Aelle and the rightful king Osbert, both too blinded by hatred to see the blade. Civil war is the perfect invitation for a well-planned invasion, and Ivar accepted this gift with open arms. He calculated his attack for November 1st, All Saints' Day. The nobility and military leaders were unarmed inside the cathedrals, expecting divine protection and celebrating their faith. What they received was pagan steel. The Vikings breached the gates of York while hymns still echoed, turning the holy sanctuary into a slaughterhouse. Ivar did not make the mistake of burning York. He occupied and fortified it. He repaired the Roman walls, stocked the granaries, and sat on Aelle's throne, waiting. He knew the humiliation of losing the capital would force the English rivals to unite. He wanted Aelle and Osbert to come to him. It was the classic tactic of placing cheese in the mousetrap and waiting. It took 4 months for the English kings to swallow their pride and join forces. In March 867, the Northumbrians attacked with the fervor of a desperate crusade. Initially, they seemed to succeed, breaching the outer defenses and invading the streets. but they did not realize that Ivar had opened the gates on purpose. When the English army flooded the narrow alleys of York, the traps snapped shut with violence. Vikings emerged from rooftops and side alleys, blocking the exits and turning the city into a claustrophobic death box. Panic spread instantly. Squeezed together, the English could not use their long spears or form shield walls. It was a close-quarters massacre. King Osbert fought, but was trampled and killed in the confusion. The crusade turned into carnage. However, there was a strict order amidst the chaos. Aelle was not to die in combat. Ragnar's sons searched for his face in the terrified crowd. When the army crumbled, Aelle found himself surrounded and disarmed. The Battle of York ended, but the true horror was just beginning. Aelle was not executed on the spot. He was chained and brought before the brothers. The hall was silent, broken only by the heavy breathing of the victors. Aelle looked at the dais and saw the prophecy materialize. The piglets were now wolves, and he was the prey. Ivar, lying on his furs, watched him with reptilian eyes, preparing to extract the price for his father's death. There was no ransom negotiation. Aelle was not a common prisoner of war. He was a criminal who violated sacred laws by torturing a hero to death. Ivar wanted to know the details. If Ragnar screamed, how long the venom took. Every question was psychological torture. The decision was made. Aelle would suffer the blood eagle. He was taken to a high hill, staked to the ground face down, transformed into a living canvas for the masterpiece of vengeance. The blood eagle is history's most infamous execution. With surgical precision, the skin of Aelle's back was sliced open like parchment, exposing muscles and spine. Cruelly, he remained conscious. Then, with hammer and chisel, ribs were severed from the spine, one by one. The dry snap of bone echoed in the silence. The ribs were forced outward, creating the grotesque shape of bloody wings on the back of the still living man. The final act was to remove the lungs from the chest cavity and place them over the broken ribs. With Aelle's last agonizing breaths, the lungs inflated and deflated, simulating the beating wings of an eagle. He died screaming, denied entry to Valhalla, serving as a visceral warning to any king who dared challenge the Lothbrok bloodline. The blood debt was paid, but the great army's hunger had not been sated. Vengeance is hard to stop. With Northumbria destroyed, the army turned south. The next target was Edmund of East Anglia, who had tried to buy peace with horses years earlier. Edmund learned the hard way that Ivar did not honor agreements with prey. When the Vikings returned in 869, they demanded the entire kingdom. Edmund, a devout Christian, refused to submit his people to pagans or renounce his faith. Captured, he became the next example of Ivar's creative cruelty. If Aelle's death was about anatomy, Edmund's was about volume. Ivar ordered the king tied to a tree and used as a target. Archers fired volley after volley, avoiding vital organs to prolong the suffering. Chronicles say his body became like a hedgehog, covered in arrows, while he continued to pray. Bored with the king's spiritual resistance, Ivar ordered his decapitation. The head was thrown into the forest, denying him a dignified burial. The message was clear: surrender or die screaming. Terror spread to Mercia, the powerful central kingdom. King Burgred, seeing the fate of Aelle and Edmund, made a pragmatic and cowardly choice. He did not fight. He ran. As the Vikings advanced to Repton, Burgred took his gold and fled to Rome, dying in exile. Mercia fell without a sword being raised. The map of England was now almost entirely black, dominated by the overwhelming Norse presence. Only Wessex remained. The last Saxon kingdom, the final line of defense between England's survival and total Scandinavian domination. The great army turned its hungry eyes south, expecting another easy victory. But in Wessex, they found something new. Not an arrogant tyrant or a passive martyr, but a sickly young prince named Alfred. Underestimated by everyone due to his frail health, Alfred possessed the only weapon Ivar respected, a tactical mind. Alfred, who would become the Great, took the throne amidst the chaos of 871. After bloody and inconclusive battles, he realized he could not defeat the army at that moment. He did the unthinkable. He paid the Danegeld, a massive tribute of silver. Critics called it cowardice, but it was strategy. Alfred paid to buy time. He needed years of peace to reform the army, build ships, and prepare the final defense that would save his culture. Curiously, at the height of his power, Ivar disappeared from English records. The man who orchestrated the Blood Eagle left for Dublin, where he reigned as king of all Norsemen in Ireland and Britain. But death found him not on the battlefield, but in bed. In 873, Ivar died of a sudden and hideous disease. The body that betrayed him in life finally took him. It was an anticlimactic end for a legend, but his shadow would continue to loom over the island. Legend says Ivar asked to be buried on the English coast, prophesying that no invader would conquer the island as long as his bones watched the sea. It is said that William the Conqueror only succeeded in 1066 after digging up and burning Ivar's body, breaking the curse. Truth or myth, Ivar's legacy was undeniable. He destroyed 2 kingdoms, executed 2 kings, and altered British DNA forever. The vengeance was complete, but the consequences eternal. With vengeance sated, the nature of the invasion changed. The Vikings who stayed did not just want to loot, they wanted to live. They traded swords for plows, establishing the Danelaw, a vast region where Norse laws and customs ruled. Ragnar's death led to the hybridization of a culture. The blood of the old boar and the English kings mixed in the soil, creating the foundations of a new society. Extreme violence generated roots that shaped the island. Vengeance is a fire that often forges something new from ashes. The chaos brought by the Great Army forced the Anglo-Saxons to evolve or perish. They needed a visionary, and they found one in Alfred. While the Vikings celebrated, Alfred built the first English navy and a network of fortresses called burhs. He used the time bought with silver to ensure that when war returned, Wessex would not be another Mercia. He was ready for the counterattack. Looking back, the saga of Ragnar's sons is a brutal study in cause and effect. An act of cruelty in a snake pit triggered a geopolitical avalanche. Aella paid for his mistake with his own anatomy, but the real price was paid by the people of England. Cities were razed, monasteries burned, and borders redrawn. History shows us that underestimating the capacity for vengeance of a powerful family is the most fatal mistake a ruler can make in any era. The figure of Ivar the Boneless remains one of the great military enigmas. A physically broken man who led the world's fiercest warriors defies our understanding of ancient leadership. He proved that fear is a more potent weapon than steel, and that intelligence beats brute force in the long run. His campaign in England was not just an invasion, it was a masterclass in the systematic dismantling of enemy nations, executed with terrifying precision. And what of Ragnar? He died laughing, believing his sons would bring glory to his name, and they did in the bloodiest way possible. But they also brought the end of the purely raiding way of life. By conquering lands, they became settlers, vulnerable to counterattacks and politics. Vengeance was the last great act of the lightning raid era. What followed was the era of kingdoms. Ragnar's final laugh echoed until it turned into the foundation of England. The Blood Eagle, whether historical fact or monastic propaganda, defines the memory we have of the Vikings. Brutal, artistic in violence, and relentless. It serves as an eternal reminder that justice in the Dark Ages was not blind. It had sharp eyes and a knife in hand. Aella and Edmund became bloody footnotes, examples of what happens when you cross the path of men who consider death in battle the highest honor and vengeance a sacred duty. Wessex's survival under Alfred is the miraculous counterpoint to this destruction. If Ivar was the unstoppable sword, Alfred was the unbreakable shield. The clash between Viking culture and Saxon resistance created the spark that lit the English Middle Ages. Without the existential threat of the Great Army, a unified England might never have been born. In a way, Ragnar's killers were the unwitting architects of the nation that would eventually absorb them. Today, as you walk through York or along the ancient Roman roads of the north, you step over the bones of this war. Place names, dialects, and even local genetics carry the indelible mark of the 865 invasion. History is not something dead in books. It lives in the consequences of these actions. The fury of Ragnar's sons shaped the Western world in ways we barely realize, proving that personal vengeance can indeed alter the destiny of millions of people. The saga ends with a balance restored by blood. The torturers died, the avengers conquered, and the survivors built something new upon the ruins. It is a narrative of human extremes, filial love, visceral hatred, desperate courage, and sadistic cruelty. In the end, the lesson is clear. History is written by the victors, but the foundation is always built on the corpses of the vanquished. The cycle of violence closed, but its scars defined a nation. The brutality of the Blood Eagle forces us to question the limits of justice and barbarism. For the Vikings, it was a necessary ritual to restore honor. For the Saxons, it was proof they faced demons. This mutual misunderstanding fueled the war. But ironically, it was this very war that forced contact, exchange, and eventually fusion. Ivar's terror and Alfred's wisdom were the two sides of the coin that bought Britain's future. The efficiency with which the army decapitated English leadership was frightening. In less than a decade, centuries-old dynasties were erased. This demonstrates the fragility of power structures when confronted by an external force that does not play by the same rules. Ella expected a traditional war. He received total annihilation. This asymmetry of expectations and tactics allowed a foreign army to dominate almost the entire island so quickly. The role of religion cannot be ignored. Ella and Edmund believed God would protect them, while the Vikings saw their victory as proof of Odin's favor. The theological clash was as violent as the military one. Edmund's death, riddled with arrows like a northern Saint Sebastian, galvanized Christian resistance in the long run, turning him into a saint and uniting the people against the pagans. Martyrdom is often a more powerful weapon than conquest itself. The legend of the grunting piglets is perhaps the most prophetic phrase of the Viking Age. It encapsulates the inevitability of generational retribution. Ragnar knew his death would be more powerful than his life. He used his own end as a strategic weapon to mobilize his sons. It was a calculated sacrifice by a father who knew exactly what his offspring were capable of. He left no inheritance in gold, but in hatred, and that hatred proved to be the most valuable currency. Burgred's flight from Mercia contrasts painfully with Edmund's stoic death. History tends to forgive martyrs, but despises cowards. By fleeing to Rome, Burgred saved his life, but destroyed his legacy. He showed that in the face of the absolute terror of the Blood Eagle, even anointed kings can break. Ivar's psychological warfare was so effective that it won battles before armies even met on the field, demoralizing entire kingdoms with fear. Ivar's transition from field commander to king in Dublin shows his versatility. He was not just a warlord, he was an empire builder. His influence spanned the entire Irish Sea, creating a network of Norse power that would last for centuries. His death by disease is a humble reminder that no matter how legendary the warrior, human biology is the only enemy that cannot be defeated with strategy or cruelty. The persistence of Viking culture in northern England, the Danelaw, is the final proof of the Great Army's victory. They were not completely repelled, they became part of the landscape. Modern English is rich in Norse words, like sky, egg, window, thanks to this forced coexistence. Ragnar's vengeance resulted not only in death, but in a linguistic and cultural transformation that enriched British identity permanently and irreversibly. Alfred, by paying the Danegeld, showed that courage sometimes requires swallowing pride. He understood that the nation's survival was more important than immediate glory on the battlefield. This long-term vision is what separated Wessex from the other kingdoms. While other kings reacted emotionally or with fear, Alfred acted rationally. He used Viking greed against them, buying the only thing they could not loot: the future. The narrative of Viking vengeance is compelling because it touches on primal instincts. We all understand the desire for justice for a murdered father. The scale of the response, destroying entire nations, is what makes it epic. It is the definitive story of an eye for an eye, taken to the maximum extreme. It fascinates and horrifies us in equal measure, serving as a dark mirror for the desires of retribution that exist in all of us, but which civilization represses. The urban guerrilla tactics in York showed Viking sophistication. They were not just mad berserkers, they were combat engineers, blocking streets, using the high ground of rooftops, creating kill zones. All this indicates a level of advanced discipline and military planning. Ivar professionalized Viking warfare, transforming Norse fury into a surgical tool of mass destruction that feudal English armies could not comprehend. Ella's final fate serves as the grim climax of the saga. From arrogant king to bloody eagle, his fall was absolute. He represents hubris, the excessive pride that precedes the fall. By denying Ragnar an honorable death, he guaranteed his own dishonorable one. It is an ancient moral lesson, written in blood and bone. Cruelty breeds cruelty, and violence sown always returns for the harvest, often multiplied tenfold. The story of the Great Heathen Army is, at its core, about the collision of two worlds, the ancient pagan tribal world colliding with the medieval Christian feudal world. The sparks from this clash ignited Europe. It was the last great gasp of aggressive paganism before the gradual conversion of Scandinavia. Ragnar's vengeance was the high point of this era, a moment when the old gods seemed to triumph over the new god through the sheer force of steel. The image of Ragnar's sons standing over Ailla's corpse is iconic. It represents the fulfillment of filial duty above all else. In a society where family honor was the most valuable currency, they were the richest men in the world at that moment. They restored the balance of the Viking universe. The blood on their hands was not a stain, but a badge of honor, physical proof that they loved their father enough to burn the world for him. Ivar's complexity as a historical character is fascinating. Was he a monster? Yes, but he was also a genius. History often asks us to choose between villain and hero, but Ivar defies this categorization. He was England's nightmare and Scandinavia's hero. His physical disability, far from being an impediment, seems to have sharpened his mind, forcing him to develop mental weapons where others used only muscles, making him doubly dangerous. Alfred's legacy begins where Ivar's vengeance ends. It is important to note that Alfred's greatness was only possible because of the magnitude of the threat. Great heroes need great villains. Without the great army to test him, Alfred would have been just a sickly and forgotten king. The pressure of Viking steel forged the diamond of the English monarchy. Ragnar's vengeance inadvertently created the greatest king in Saxon history. The precision with which the army dismantled the heptarchy, the 7 English kingdoms, revealed the weakness of disunity. The Vikings attacked each kingdom in isolation, preventing a coordinated defense. It was a hard political lesson. Unite or die. This lesson took centuries to be fully absorbed, but the seed of England's unification was planted there, in the blood-soaked soil of the battles against Ragnar's sons. Edmund's death and subsequent canonization show how military defeat can turn into cultural victory. Ivar killed the man, but created the myth. Saint Edmund became the patron saint of England for a long time, a symbol of spiritual resistance that Vikings could not kill with arrows. In the long run, the faith Edmund refused to abandon ended up converting the invaders themselves in an ironic twist of history. Terror tactics, like the Blood Eagle, had a practical purpose: to discourage resistance. When an enemy army knows that defeat means unimaginable torture, morale collapses. Fear was a strategic weapon. Ivar understood that war is won as much in the enemy's mind as on the battlefield. He broke the English will to fight before even breaking their shield lines, using the reputation of brutality as a force multiplier. Closing this narrative analysis, we return to the beginning, the pain of losing a father. Everything that happened, the battles, the executions, the changing of history, was born from a basic human emotion. The Great Army was the geopolitical manifestation of grief. It is a powerful reminder that history is driven by human passions, not just economics. The love of 4 sons for their father redrew the map of Europe forever. The cycle is complete. The old boar was avenged, the piglets became legends, and England was transformed. The scars of this war are still visible in culture, language, and land. Ragnar Lothbrok's vengeance was not just an event. It was a cataclysm that ended one era and began another. And as long as human memory lasts, the echo of that prophecy will continue to resonate. Vengeance is the coldest and bloodiest dish history has ever served. If you want to see how a sickly scholar king defeated the Viking warriors and became the Great, subscribe now. Click the bell so you don't miss Alfred's epic counterattack that saved England. And tell me in the comments, was the Blood Eagle a real practice or a myth to scare Christians? I'll read your theories. Remember, history is written by the victors but built on the bones of the vanquished.